We're going to get started with our Dutch Cycling Transformation Infrastructure and Communications webinar. We will have time for Q&A at the end, and you're welcome to submit your questions in the chat below. I would like to welcome our guest speakers, Chris and Melissa Bruntlett, and invite them to introduce themselves and begin their presentations.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Do you want to start?
Of course. Yeah, goedemorgen. Good morning from the Netherlands. We are sitting at our kitchen table in Delft and very pleased to be with you all today to present a little bit about our work with our respective organizations and hopefully give you some information and inspiration. My name is Chris Bruntlett, and I am International Relations Manager with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and we are a public-private partnership based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I myself have worked in mobility and urbanism for almost 15 years now as a native Canadian, and but for the past 7 living and working with this great organization, working with cities around the world to learn from decades of best practice and inspiring and informing them to implement some of these changes on their own streets.
And I am Melissa Bruntlett. So I am the self-employed owner of Modacity Creative, and that's what I'll be talking to you about is the work that I do within that firm. I also have been in this realm for 15 years now as a storyteller, an author, content creator, as well as advising on sustainable mobility projects, how cities can realize more walking and cycling friendly spaces. So my part of the presentation today will come after Chris, but I'm going to talk a bit about what we need to be thinking about when we're talking to people, when we're trying to build buy-in for these kinds of projects, different messaging tactics and such. But we're going to give you, or Chris is going to give you the groundwork in terms of the Dutch experience and from more of the hardware orgware side of things, and I'll get into more of the software and communications. But I'm happy to be joining some of this content. If you happen to be here on the bike immersion program in the spring, will be fairly similar. But we look forward to on my part, the conversations and questions that might come. I'm going to sneak out of camera, so it's not too weird to have 2 of us on while Chris is talking. But with that, I'll pass it back to Chris.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get rolling. So as I said, I'm lucky enough now to work for an organization called the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We are a nonprofit foundation that was created in 2011 by the Netherlands national government, and we continue to be financed and supported by the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure to serve 2 purposes. We are a diplomatic organization in terms of sharing knowledge and cooperating internationally with other governments around the world. We work quite closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to, as a form of cycling diplomacy, if you will, from a country that obviously does a great deal of cycling, and then a form of economic development in terms of creating new opportunities for the Dutch cycling sector to sell their products and services overseas. So we have quite an extensive network of organizations that are members of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. They are organizations of all different sizes and types from every corner of the country. One thing they have in common is they have a passion for cycling, and they work overseas. And on the private side of our network, we have a good number of planners, of engineers, of consultants that are doing the policymaking and the design work that's necessary to change the infrastructure. We have a good number of producers that are producing everything that this great cycling system needs, from, of course, the bicycles themselves to the racks that are used for parking, to the signs and the wayfinding that help cyclists get to where they're going. And then we have a significant number of public partners, that is, government institutions like municipal, regional, provincial governments, public transport agencies like the National Railways, universities, and other nonprofits and knowledge institutes. So we're able to draw from this great body of knowledge and expertise every time we receive a request from around the world. And we receive a significant number of these requests, 800 to 1,000 on average each and every year. And they take many different shapes and sizes. They are sometimes just responded to via email or video call, but we do like to do the bulk of our work in a face-to-face setting. That is um, bringing groups of decision makers to the Netherlands. And as you can see on the screen here, we've been working quite extensively with decision makers in Southeast Florida, with Palm Beach, with Broward County, and with Miami-Dade County, bringing them to the Netherlands, all levels of leadership and decision making, to be inspired by the conditions here, visiting a variety of Dutch cities like Rotterdam, like The Hague, but also meeting with the experts, the policymakers, the politicians that are responsible for some of that infrastructure, understanding better the underlying principles, and also, of course, understanding how that might be translated and adapted to a very different context, admittedly, in that part of the world. Inversely, we also do a number of what are called Think Bike workshops, where we're bringing the Dutch expertise to you. And we were lucky enough to have done 4 of these workshops over the last 4 years. We're coming back to Palm Beach in early in the new year, in the second week of January, for another follow-up workshop with all kinds of officials there. And the idea, of course, is to present this some of this material in a very intensive but accessible way. And then we break out the case studies, the projects that are the practical application of this material in terms of applying what has been learned from the Netherlands onto actual streets and intersections and public spaces in that local context. So, why does the Netherlands have a cycling embassy? Why does the average Dutch person cycle over 1,000 kilometers a year? Of course, if you ask those questions and the street or on social media, you may get kind of some common responses. The country's flat, the weather is temperate, the Dutch have cycling in their DNA, and all of those things are true to a certain extent, but they cannot be the one and only reason that the Dutch cycle. There are plenty of other places that have similar favorable geographic conditions. And I hope this heat map, this image, really gives you a picture of why it is actually that the Dutch cycle as much as they do. It really comes down to the density and the quality of the infrastructure. Over 40,000 kilometers of fully separated cycling paths in the Netherlands alone, half of which has been built in the last 25 to 30 years. So a lot more recent than most people actually realize. And if you wanted, you could almost draw a line between the Dutch and German and the Dutch and Belgian borders to the east and south. Such is the stark difference in quality and density of infrastructure, but also in terms of the number of people riding. So we do have a correlation between that infrastructure and the vast number of people that are using it. But it wasn't always this way, and I think this is one point we have to emphasize over and over again, that the Netherlands wasn't always a cycling paradise. It wasn't always destined to be a cycling paradise. It was actually a response to a very specific set of circumstances, two converging crises that happened in the 1970s. And up until that point, the Netherlands was actually headed down the same route of car dominance and car dependency as a lot of its peers, including most European nations, but and North American nations. They were widening their streets, demolishing a lot of their buildings. They were even filling in a number of their canals to make space for the automobile in their cities. And it's, as I said, only in response to these crises and kind of a perfect storm of instances that really creates this turning point and an inflection point in the mid 1970s that sets the country off in a very different direction. What are those circumstances? Well, entire books have been written about them, and it is quite complex. But in short, there was a road safety crisis that came to a head in 1972, with thousands and thousands of people being killed by traffic each and every year, including a significant number of children. And Stop the Child Murder, Stop the Kindermoord became the rallying cry of families all across the country, taking to the streets to demand more from their elected officials, because they could see the space that was being taken away for their children in particular to safely walk, cycle, and play in the streets. In and around that time, we have the OPEC oil crisis, which affected the country for 6 weeks, where the price of gasoline skyrocketed, the price or the sale of bicycles doubled, and we have what a lot of historians refer to as a light bulb moment, where the residents of the Netherlands can suddenly cycle on the motorway, and all through their cities, they can see the vast amounts of space that they had given away in their cities to the private car. This is also perhaps just as importantly recognized at the governmental level, because the oil crisis makes it abundantly clear to that government that a one-sided car-based transportation system, by putting all of their eggs in one basket, they were actually setting up a very fragile transportation system that was susceptible to outside shocks and interferences, be it an oil crisis, be it extreme weather events, or be it a global pandemic, as we saw more recently, where the cities that had more balanced, diversified, multimodal transport systems were better suited to handle changes in how we moved around in response to, yeah, a pretty serious crisis or emergency. So we have this inflection point, and that's important. But I would argue what is also just as important is the 20 to 30-year period of trial and error that comes after that inflection point. Because at that time, there's no Dutch blueprint, there is no guidebook or manual about how to build cycling cities. And so municipalities all across the country were just trying different things, throwing paint and planter boxes and bollards and different materials on the ground to see what worked and what didn't work. And of course, out of that process, we have a lot of successes, but we also have a lot of failures, where two demonstration projects in particular in 1977 and 1978 in Tilburg and in The Hague, one-off demonstration projects, single cycle lanes running through the city, and neither of them failed to, or both of them, sorry, failed to attract the ridership, the support of the community, and the support of the business community, and are largely deemed failures. So when it came to the third kick at the can, if you will, the third attempt at a demonstration project by the national government, they went to the city of Delft, the city that Melissa and I are lucky enough to call home. And instead of designing and building one individual cycle path, they decided this time around that they would build an entire network. So this is, yeah, a critically important breakthrough when it comes to cycling planning in the Netherlands. This network-based approach becomes the blueprint for cities across the Netherlands. And the change in strategy that was done in Delft, of course, was not just connecting a handful of origins and destinations with a single project, but trying to connect as many origins and destinations in the city as possible. The places where people live and where they work and where they go to school and where they shop and where they catch public transportation. All those myriad journeys that we take throughout a day, trying to capture them and provide the bicycle as an alternative for those trips from A to B to C to D and so on and so forth. And by designing and building this network and building it in an accelerated manner, they suddenly saw the diversity and the number of people riding bicycles skyrocket. And we saw more women and more children and more elderly people riding bikes, and they were riding bikes more frequently and further distances. And so, as I said, this becomes the breakthrough moving ahead. And out of this process, we have the 5 principles of network design, which are applied in cities all across the country, that a cycling network has to be direct, it has to be coherent, it has to be safe, it has to be comfortable, and it has to be attractive. And if you're checking all of those boxes, you're well on your way to providing cycling as a full-fledged mode of transportation in your city or region. So I'll run through those 5 principles very quickly. I don't necessarily have the time to dwell on them. These are, where we, in our workshops and our capacity building exercises, we really do deeper dives into them. But cohesion is the overall seamlessness of the network. Again, looking at the door-to-door experience, making it as consistent and as comfortable as possible, connecting all of those origins and destinations, and of course, with a special emphasis on getting the intersection design right, because that is where cyclists and pedestrians are at their most vulnerable. Directness refers to, trying to keep the distance from A to B as short as possible on your cycling network. So that is minimizing the number of unnecessary detours and stops that the cyclist has to make it as time competitive as possible. And that's embodied through this idea that on the cycling network, we can't exceed the distance as the crow flies by more than 20%. Safety feels very intuitive and very obvious, but this is also an area where a lot of cities do get it wrong, and it's not about providing physical separation in every single situation, but where we can't reduce the speed and the volume of the cars to 20 miles per hour or less, then we have to provide physical separation between the various modes of traffic with the understanding that we should be reducing these major differences in speed and mass between the various road users. Comfort is taking safety to another level. We can be statistically safe, but we also have to make getting on a bike, a fairly pleasant experience. And that ranges from everything from the width of the cycle path, the ability to ride side by side with a friend and have a conversation, making cycling a social activity, the smoothness of the asphalt, the shade that you may be able to provide on hot summer days. All of these little considerations that may make people choose the bicycle, in addition to, of course, the time competitiveness. And then attractiveness takes all of that, I think, to the next level, so that even in situations where choosing the bicycle may not be the most practical choice, it may be a little bit longer or a little bit further, it's still a very enticing choice because the route itself is beautiful. It's next to a lake or a river or through a forest. So access to beautiful spaces, making that cycling experience really enticing, is ultimately what means the levels of cycling, not just for transportation, but for recreation as well. So as I said, there's various elements to this, and the intersection design has become major point of contention, and one of the most important places in a network design where we have to provide a significant level of focus and detail that we can't give up at the intersection as a lot of cities do because it's too difficult or complicated. The cycling and the walking infrastructure needs to be carried through the intersection in a raised, prioritized, a seamless position. Ideally with these corner islands and mid-block islands that really force the right and the left turning motor traffic to put their foot on the brake, to slow down, to raise their awareness, to visually acknowledge the people that may be crossing the street. And so there are all these design elements that we can bring to the intersection design to minimize the risk of collision, because this is still where the vast majority of car-bike collisions occur. And then, of course, we can't just be thinking about the cycling network. We also have to think about the car network. And one thing that Dutch cities do that's ubiquitous but also invisible is this idea of traffic circulation and traffic calming. The reduction in the volume of traffic, prevention of through traffic through sensitive residential and commercial areas, so that the people that are using the streets are the locals that want to walk, want to cycle, want to live on those streets, and they're not used for rat running or by motorists who want to take a shortcut through their neighborhood or through their shopping district. And so there's a very simple hierarchy of streets and road network designs that push the through traffic away from these sensitive areas and add to this time competitiveness that I keep referring to, that makes the bicycle the fastest choice within the city. And then speed management becomes a very important part of this. Of course, this magic 30-kilometer or 20 mile per hour threshold, where people on foot or bike have a much higher chance of surviving a collision. Dutch cities, 80% of their urban streets are this magic number, 30 kilometers, 20 miles an hour or less. But it's not about just posting up a sign and hoping for the best. It's very much proactively engineered. The street is designed to reflect that desired speed. through the narrowing of streets, the introduction of chicanes and speed tables and texture changes, and all kinds of little tricks that the engineers use, knowing that enforcement and education will only get you so far. We have to actively have to engineer for the behavior that we want on these streets. And then, yeah, the beautiful bike train combination. And we could spend an entire session on this, but there's something really synergistic about the way that cycling is used as a feeder mode. Here in the Netherlands, it extends the reach of the public transportation system, so it attracts more passengers on the trams, buses, and trains. But it also puts more cyclists on the cycling infrastructure, and one of the situations where the two modes really work together quite beautifully to create more train passengers, but also create more cyclists. We have all kinds of benefits that that brings, but the one in the top left is the one that I really want to drill down on, this idea that we can, just by enabling cycling to a stop or station, attract 25 to 30 times more users, more customers to the public transport system than we would if they were simply walking to the station. So for me, on a regular basis, my house is in Delft, my office is in Utrecht, 65 kilometers away. I'm able to cycle to the Delft railway station, park my bike in the underground bike parking facility where there's always a free, sheltered and guarded bike parking space, go straight through the turnstiles down onto the platform to catch a train. And then on the other end of the journey, I can tap my public transport card, rent a shared bicycle, the blue and yellow Ove and take a bike to the last mile of my journey. So we through the bike at the start and the end of the train journey, we have this door-to-door convenience that really provides an alternative to the car over significant distances. That starts with the bike parking, of course, and this is a national program that's taken place that's built hundreds of thousands of bike parking spaces across the country. In this case, similar principles have been developed through this process, nine design principles. And again, I won't go through them all one by one this time, but give you a sense of how much thought and how much has been learned through this process, this decades-long process of designing convenient, accessible, and user-friendly bike parking at the train stations in particular. And as I mentioned, the bike sharing on the other end of this the journey is also a critically important component to this system. The whole chain falls apart if we do not have this last mile solution, and it is used on an immense scale because it's made as seamless, as inexpensive, and as accessible as possible to the train passengers. Further to that, we have the introduction of the e-bike, which we can see has been a largely positive development here in the Netherlands. It has had some negative consequences when we're talking about the busy, congested cycling infrastructure in cities like Amsterdam, but largely it's doubled the range of cycling. So it's brought a whole new opportunity to connect cycling infrastructure to surrounding suburbs, villages, towns around the cities. Because suddenly, with that extra pedal assist that people have, they're willing and able to cycle further and further distances, and it's bringing more elderly people, more women, more teenagers into cycling who live further and further out the city. So that's changed the type of infrastructure that's being built here. We're no longer talking about trips of a couple of miles within cities, but trips of many miles in between cities. And so we have what is basically a cycling highway network that's being built out by the various levels of government here that is capturing the potential that the e-bike brings to the journey, that extended range that the e-bike offers to connect all of these areas with their needs for housing, for healthcare, for education, and in general, their connection to opportunity. This cycling infrastructure has become a critical strategy as we build new housing across the Netherlands to address affordability and a lack of proximity to this opportunity. So I'll close by just touching on some of the benefits that come with taking this seriously over decades. You know, it's not just about getting more people cycling, but it's about achieving our broader societal aspirations around health, happiness, the economy, inclusion, and so on. This, of course, starts with road safety, and these are some pretty stark numbers you can see on the screen here, not just for cycling, but also for walking. That road safety crisis in the 1970s that sparked this revolution has led year on year to reductions to the point where the Netherlands is now one of the safest places in the world to walk or cycle. when we are considering the exposure or the amount of walking and cycling that people do. But it's not just about saving lives. We have to also talk about extending lives, the health benefits that come with regular cardiovascular exercise, not intensive exercise, but brief periods of physical activity mean that the Dutch are saving billions on their healthcare system. They're inadvertently getting exercise just by moving from A to B to C and so on and so forth, and preventing thousands of premature deaths each and every year just by the design of their transportation system. And then the final piece of this puzzle, and one that I have to emphasize and love to emphasize, is this is not a zero-sum game, that you can create a cycling paradise that also benefits drivers as well. And so even if you never get on a bicycle, you will see a benefit to getting more people cycling because it reduces traffic congestion and frees up precious road space for people who still want to drive and need to drive. And the Netherlands is regularly ranked as one of the best places in the world to be a driver, specifically referencing its low levels of traffic congestion. So I want to close out my presentation with a little bit of a deep dive into a case study, a city that we've been working with in the heart of Texas that may be a bit more familiar to you all, and I think proof that some of these ideas and principles that I've been talking about can be applied to even the most or least likely of candidates. In Austin, is a city we've been working with since 2012, and they've built out hundreds of kilometers of red-tinted Dutch-inspired cycling infrastructure through the knowledge exchanges, the study visits, and the workshops that we've done. So we first have to, I think, acknowledge that Austin is not Amsterdam. It's never going to be Amsterdam. It's a very different context. And despite the fact that Greater Amsterdam and Greater Austin have similar populations, Austin is about 3 times the geographic size, so 1/3 of the population density. And with that creates, of course, a very sprawling, very car-dependent environment. So we went there in 2011 with our Dutch experts, working with the city council, working with the mayor's office, working with the local planners and engineers to look at what were the opportunities in that very different and challenging environment to try and create some not Dutch levels of cycling, but some Dutch-inspired infrastructure and a made in Austin solution. They had 3 big takeaways from this process. The first was to invest where the short trips are, not just to build cycle paths everywhere, but to really look at, even in a city like Austin, which is fairly sprawling, half of all the car journeys are under 3 miles. 50% of all the car trips and journeys in Austin are 3 miles. I would venture to guess that's probably very similar as Southeast Florida. So we can, by using traffic modeling software, identify where these short car trips are taking place in terms of the corridors and intersections, and then we can use that to inform our investments. They also took away this idea of using cycling to feed public transport. Austin's in the process right now of investing billions in a light rail system. And to make sure that this light rail system reaches the maximum number of residents to maximize their return on that investment, they're looking strategically at cycling as a feeder mode with that extended catchment range that will ultimately benefit more residents, especially the ones that don't have the privilege of living in proximity to a stop or a station. And then the third big light bulb moment during this workshop was that we can't just plan for individual modes in isolation. And so, as I've mentioned earlier, it really becomes about a process of unraveling the bike network from the car network and then looking at the points of intersection with the public transport network. And this is the secret sauce, if you will, that has made Dutch cities so successful and ultimately formed the blueprint of Austin's 2014 Bicycle Master Plan. So as you can see on the right, they planned out a 650-kilometer, over 400-mile network that you can see in the green there, specifically with the goal to capture 15%, 15% of their short car journeys. And this became the blueprint that Austin has moved towards in the last 10 years or so. So you have beautiful red cycling paths. This is downtown Austin on 3rd Street. This was the first cycle path that they built. They actually specifically chose the red tinted concrete as a homage to the Dutch inspired roots of the cycling network. It's not rocket science, but has formed the first link in their network. And then as you get further out into the suburbs, you have similar red tinted. This is a greenfield development, a brand new neighborhood that was built on a former military base where they did a Texas variation on a protected intersection. And they've applied this idea in many other intersections across Austin now. So these are the numbers, and I think, yeah, it's really kind of a incredible success story that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. But by strategically investing in capturing these short car journeys, they've shown what is possible with the political will, with weaving together a story that showed that this cycling network would benefit all residents of Austin, whether they get on a bike or not, by reducing traffic congestion, increasing quality of life, and improving access to opportunity. Yeah, so I will close my presentation with a rhetorical question. But in all seriousness, it is very much kind of the junction that we find ourselves at as a society. I think we continue to hear from the automotive industry, from Silicon Valley and other high-tech innovators that the future is autonomous, self-driving, maybe even flying cars, where we're just going to apply innovation and technology to the status quo, and we'll spend the same amount of time in our cars, but we will just be a bit more productive inside of those cars, exercising, working, sleeping, and so on and so forth. For all the reasons that we know and all the reasons that I've outlined, we can change that narrative. We can provide a different future, one that's rooted in accessibility, one that's rooted in age friendliness, and I think you'll hear from Melissa all the various ways that the infrastructure and the urban planning here benefits every resident, whether they can afford a car or not. So with that, I will thank you very much for your attention. This is, by the way, this is not Amsterdam or Rotterdam or Utrecht. This is downtown Austin. I think quite a beautiful example of Dutch-inspired infrastructure that really connects with their public transport system. If you want to learn more about the DC and we maybe don't get around to answering your questions later, please look us up on our website, on our social media channels, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to, via the QR code, if you want to chat more about some of these projects. So with that, I will hand the floor over to Melissa, and looking forward to chatting more during the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. And I will share my screen. There we go. Yeah, so you've got a bit of the background now in terms of how the Netherlands became a cycling nation. What are some of the integral components in terms of realizing that from a design perspective, and of course, some real life examples of what that looks like, not just in the Dutch context, but also in the American context as well. And so my portion of this is to sort of talk through why we need to be thinking about creating compelling narratives alongside the hardware orgware side of things. So it's not just about designing the infrastructure, making the plans and having the policies, but also how do we inspire people to see the benefits of what you're doing. I think in the conversations that we've had with various people from Southeast Florida, but of course from around the world, is there are a lot of great ideas, but then oftentimes people either don't know they exist or they don't know why they exist, and that creates unnecessary backlash or pushback. So hopefully this presentation can give you a little bit of the tools that you can take with you to complement all of that other work that's happening. So we start with why, always starting with why, whether it's designing, planning, or making policies, or doing communications. Why do we need a compelling narrative? As we're well familiar with, we live at a time when how people feel has a stronger influence over their behavior than what is factually correct, whether they feel something that's accurate or not. And at the same time, narratives around cycling as being very green or more physically healthy doesn't always resonate with people. And at the same time, misinformation or misunderstanding is creating a lot of very polarized views when it comes to investments in cycling. We know that it can be quite beneficial to a lot of people, but unfortunately, the way the narratives have been taken over in some echo chambers leads people to believe otherwise. And then finally, and part of the reason that Chris and I both got started in this space in the first place is that existing images and narratives about cycling don't always reflect the people that we're trying to reach. So, there we go. So when I'm talking to organizations around creating these narratives, creating communication strategies, there are three components to this that I like to focus on. The first is who. It's really important that we understand who we're talking to and that the messaging that we're creating reflects those people. And then we also, with further to that, need to remind people why we're doing this in the first place. Why are we creating a cycling vision? Why are we building this bike lane? People need to know, and in a way that helps to communicate to them why they should keep that buy-in. And then, of course, then from there, how do we do that? How do we execute this messaging? How do we make these convincing arguments to not only build that support, but then ultimately celebrate the projects as well? So we'll start with the who in terms of building those reflective foundations for our narratives. And just as Chris sort of discussed this as well, we need to be starting with this idea that reminding people of the autonomy and freedom that children experience, the happiness they experience when they cycle. That can be reminding people of their own childhood when they learned how to ride a bike, those feelings of joy, of being finally in control of how you can move. But it also builds out to the projects and programs that you're working on in terms of safe routes to school, the empowerment for children and teenagers. We want them to feel that they don't necessarily have to rush to get their driver's license to have that freedom. There is something that they can have that provides more social activity, but also time spent outside. And it gives them the opportunity to learn about their risks in a safe environment. So when we're talking about this, it's giving that messaging to children, but also reminding the adults in their lives, or the adults in their community, that this is more than just a bike lane for who you might perceive as like the ultimate cyclist. It's about providing those freedom and choices to children. At the same time, flipping to the other end of the age spectrum, as Chris mentioned, in terms of our ability to drive, that does change as we age. And so we need to be also reminding older adults and our communities that we are providing an opportunity for our older community to age in place, to keep that mobility that keeps them not only connected to their community, but keeps them healthy. And that comes with also how these investments can support walkability and cyclability, creating relaxed cycling routes. That's a very common investment here in the Netherlands of not just creating the cycle superhighways that Chris mentioned, but also creating calmer routes that are more comfortable for older adults whose balance might be a little bit diminished as we age. And it's forgiving to them. And so that helps to provide this narrative that it's not just about one type of cyclist, but we're talking about lifelong joy of getting on a bike. At the same time, when we're building out these networks, if you're talking about creating a complete cycling vision or a plan, it's also not just supporting commutes to work, but also supporting the mobilities of care. So all of those activities that we do that we don't get paid for in the day, so taking kids to school, going to buy food for your household, taking elderly family to doctor's appointments. Right now, in most North American cities, the default is that that is something done by driving, because the car network makes that possible, although sometimes inconvenient with looking for parking, being stuck in traffic, these kinds of things. But if we look at creating a cycling network like Chris was discussing, we're actually providing that opportunity for good walking or cycling networks to do all of those trips instead, which can sometimes be more flexible, more efficient, and ultimately support the mobility of a broader range of people. And then further to that, we do need to think about social safety in our network design. And so if you're designing a cycle route and you are also investing in cycling or thinking about sight lines, we need to communicate in these narratives how the fear of violence will influence women's mobility choices. They will influence most of us, but we know from data and research that women will alter their patterns based on where they feel comfortable. And while I know Southeast Florida is a little bit lower in terms of your geographical placement on the globe, you do still have darker evenings, and people's ability to travel at night shouldn't be hindered because they feel unsafe. And so it's part of this reminder that this is about more than just getting people on a bike. It's about creating an experience that helps people feel they have safe place to travel. It helps to reduce perceptions or barriers that it's not possible, and it encourages more women and men to get on a bike at all times of year. We also need to discuss how what we're doing will benefit the disabled community. We know that we're all on this scale from well to unwell. Some of us will experience various moments in our lifetime where we can't move as easily as we did before, and having good cycling and mobility lanes, as we like to refer to them sometimes, ensures that you aren't defaulting to having to be reliant on someone else to get around, that those people that need to have adapted cycles to move because they can't drive, this is going to benefit them, to give them that space to move and make sure that they can still participate in the society in the same way that they would like to without hindering the lives of other people. And so it's really about understanding, you know, cycling isn't always about two wheels. It isn't always about the fit and the brave who want to cycle in traffic. It is also about those that would like to move around on a mobility scooter, like you see on the top there with Maya, who you met earlier, or a tricycle or another adapted cycle. Giving them that equal space ensures even greater prosperity for all of the community. And then finally, in terms of narratives, we need to remind people who already cycle why they love it. Sometimes those of us who've been cycling our whole lives can feel a little bit like frustrated, or they can sometimes be your opponents to saying what you're doing is not quite good enough. But they just need to be reminded of that joy, of that idea that this is about giving what they've experienced to as many people as possible. It's not maybe going to be perfect from day one, but it's about trying to build that advocacy long term, so they don't overlook how, you know, they've been fine for a while. Why do we need to build this new bike lane? It's about ensuring that other people can also have that same enjoyment that they've been able to enjoy for as long as they have, and building that legacy for future generations. So going from there into why, we need to understand how a vision or a plan or design, what that means or why that's important to the community. Because that's going to help you not only to build upon who's benefiting, but why people are going to be benefiting or why you're doing what you're doing. And Chris talked a lot about the bike train combination, but it's worth emphasizing in terms of messaging that the more you can link that it's not just about walking, it's not just about cycling, or it's not just about public transportation, but that the combination, especially for cycling and public transport, really is an access point for many to opportunity, whether that's education or healthcare or employment. The numbers, Chris has already gone through these, but you know, there's so many cycle journeys in the Netherlands that start with a bike ride to a public transport hub and then carrying on a bike on the other side or on foot. And that is a critical link that should be part of why you're doing what you're doing in terms of the messaging you're communicating, especially when you have that existing network already in Southeast Florida. You know, making sure you're creating that collaborative idea of cycling together with the rail that connects the entire region. Of course, you also want to be talking about how what you're doing is going to be reshaping spaces for enjoyment. We know, and I experienced it when I was in Southeast Florida, that when we create traffic calmed environments, or reduce the amount of cars moving through a space or slow them down, it creates environments that are much more social, places where we want to spend time. There are increased levels of trust. The traffic noise around gets replaced with the sounds of life, and you increase the eyes on the street, so that social safety aspect gets improved as well. And it's not necessarily, I don't say this as like a cars versus bikes conversation, but rather the social quality of a space versus one that's a little more hostile. And the spaces where we want to spend time are the spaces where we move a bit slower, where things are a bit calmer. And so a lot of what we're doing when we're designing cycling visions and plans is to help realize this. It's not for all streets, but we're trying to create these wonderful public spaces where you can move through a little bit slower. And we need to remind people why that's important. Of course, extending from that, if we're coming and we're spending time in a space, if we're moving slower by cycling and walking, businesses thrive. That increased foot and cycle traffic is a net positive for local businesses. When we cycle to a location or walk, we might not spend as much in one trip because we have a limited load that we can carry, but we're going to make more frequent visits. And so investing in that bike lane on a high street or a shared environment where you can walk, cycle, and roll slowly creates that inviting space to come, spend time, and spend money. And local businesses love it. The example in the photo on the bottom, on the left-hand side there, is from Montreal. They have an open streets program that runs every summer. Started with one street and is now 11 streets across the city. And it was started by the business community who recognized that during COVID, they were losing a lot of income. The city gave them the opportunity to have these pop-out patios to remove car traffic through the street. And create these social spaces. And it's been growing year on year in popularity. And the businesses are very much in favor of it because they're seeing that at return on investment. And so we, as the people working on these things, whether we're communicating or designing, need to remind them, you will benefit. The net benefit to you will be much greater than the minor inconvenience right now while we get things set up. And then, of course, cycling really helps all of us thrive. And it's a big why, I think, when we're talking about communicating the benefits. The improved physical health, I mentioned, sometimes it doesn't quite resonate with people, but if we can find a creative way to communicate that, it's a big selling feature for a lot of people of how they can physically feel better, but also improving mental health. For employers, it's reducing sick days. People feel more energized, more focused at work. So having those corporate bike schemes, if possible, is really beneficial. It inspires feelings of being part of a community. And so it helps to build that camaraderie that is really crucial and critical in terms of the projects you're working on to find that success. And then, of course, building those restorative spaces, that access to it for people that maybe can't escape to the Everglades every time they want a little bit of nature, but giving them a little bit of a taste of that more close to home. So finally, we'll look at how, and I'm going to run through a few of the communication tools to build that consensus. And a lot of these are things that I use in my daily practice. I've drawn from some of my own examples, but also those from around the world that I've seen that have been quite successful. Just to give you a sense, there's not one size fits all, and it's of course a mishmash of whatever makes the most sense for the campaign or the people you're trying to communicate with, but it's a good starting point. And the very first thing, and where I always start, is to have a clear communication strategy. What I see often in municipalities or local governments is you have an excellent team of designers, engineers, and planners, and you have your communications department, and sometimes the two aren't talking. And the closer you can work together, the stronger your communications team can support your work so that you can build that consensus and buy-in. You can make sure the messaging is coherent and is reaching the right people. Of course, make sure you set goals and measurements and be willing to adapt those as you go, because you will learn over time what messages work, what doesn't, and clearly define who your audience is. And I have to stress here, like I did at the beginning, you will not have one audience, you will have several. And understanding who you're going to communicate with which message is really important. And all of this really ensures that the efforts are coordinated across the team. You avoid any potential miscommunication, and remember that we're all working on the same team towards the same goal. With that, of course, engagement events are critical for any sort of communications. But I encourage you to be creative. I think most people are probably a little bit tired of the standard information evening with a bunch of boards and you walk through and maybe somebody talks to you or maybe they don't. The more we can engage the community, make them feel like their voices are heard, that they're helping design things together, get them to be your designers for the day, can help to see new ideas, but also make people feel engaged in the project. Have those open streets events if possible. make it part of a public dance event. When we were in West Palm back in February, we did see the Friday night, was it salsa dancing, which was a wonderful opportunity. The community was all together, but take advantage of those things to, you have the community there, engage with them in a fun and welcoming way, and make sure to be engaging with the entire community. So not just the usual suspects that'll always come out to your meetings, but going to children, going to underserved communities where maybe they don't have the time within their busy schedules to come to a more standard public meeting, and engage with them and talk to them there in a way that they can feel they're co-creating a solution or a potential outcome. Of course, with that, you need to make sure you're making a very deliberate effort to get good media coverage. One of the biggest mistakes we often see is that cities will come up with an excellent plan. They'll have a pretty good communication strategy, but they don't communicate with the media, and the media does their own narrative, and they take over, and they can often derail entire projects simply by communicating something that is inaccurate or maybe a bit overstated in terms of the impacts of what you're working on. So having those good relationships, having targeted press releases can really help, and foster relationships with local journalists so that, you know, they know what's going on. They're a little more invested. They know that if they come to you, they can get a good story, and, you know, try to build those connections wherever possible. This example here is from Shrewsbury, which is a small town in the UK. And there they work directly with the Business Development Association, the city, and the local media to celebrate their Shrewsbury Moves Festival, really taking all the opportunities they could to get the message out of why they were doing this, which was a complete traffic calming in their city center, how they're making it happen in terms of having an e-bike share scheme, but then also celebrating that connection between all of these normally siloed organizations that were working together. And, you know, make use of all the tools in your communications toolbox. Be a bit fun, keep your website up to date, use social media, and go to all the mediums where your audience is. You know, have big celebratory banners to talk about what you're doing. Use local celebrities if they're willing and able, and just be aspirational. Use this in a way that is showing people what is possible, and make them feel like it's something relatable to them. So I have just a few quick examples of videos. So we do there's a lot of focus on like sort of print and photography, which are really, really beneficial. But oftentimes video campaigns nowadays are some of the most compelling. And you can communicate a lot in just a little. And so the first video I have to share, it's a project I'm working on with the European Institute for Technology, their Urban Mobility Explained series. And last year I did a series of 5 shorts. There's some new ones coming out in the new year that are literally just a minute of information, but communicate a lot about an important topic that a lot of people might not have understood. And I share this not to promote myself, but rather to show you how you can do a lot in a short amount of time.
You may have been hearing a lot about school streets and find yourself asking, what is a school street? Well, basically, a school street restricts car traffic in front of a school to make it safer for children, with the first example showing up in Bolzano, Italy in 1989. The explosion of school streets can be attributed to a few factors: reducing traffic conflicts between children and cars at schools, promoting physical activity and play for children and families, and helping to address climate change and air quality. Every school street project is a little bit different. Some use temporary barriers installed by volunteers, while others use traffic calming changes to the street. Some cities are using tactical urbanism to make temporary change, with many pilots becoming permanent. School streets make getting to and from school a fun, active, and healthy part of childhood, and no matter what they look like, the positive impact is clear. Do you have a school street project that inspires you? Tell us about it below. It is inspiring to learn how cities are changing how we move in creative, healthy, and social ways.
So yeah, just again, to reiterate, there's a lot of information downloaded in 1 minute, but for the way we consume media nowadays, it's a pretty good way to get across the messages that you're trying to communicate of why this bike lane, why here, who benefits. And if you have questions, here's how to reach us. Another good thing is to make sure you're celebrating local success stories. This is a video Chris and I made together with friends back in Vancouver that celebrates the Bike to Shop days that the local bike advocacy organized. But what's particularly important about this one and why I share it with you is we coordinated with the Business Improvement Association from the downtown in Vancouver, where their CEO was formerly against a lot of the cycling infrastructure in the downtown, and did an about face through community engagement to understand what people needed. And we created this one, and we really wanted to engage with them because it's a way to celebrate that people can change their minds. And there is this wonderful benefit that can come when we start to shift people's perceptions and see the world a little bit differently.
In 2015, the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association led an engagement process to get to the heart of what Vancouverites want downtown to look like by the year 2040. They told us, build on the early success of our bike infrastructure. In the 3 years since we set out on this discovery, we've seen amazing growth and support for cycling in our city. We couldn't be happier to support sustainable organizations like Hub Cycling. As Hub says, more people cycling means healthier, happier, more connected communities. We couldn't agree more. We want to build a vibrant, sustainable downtown for future generations to enjoy. So get on your bike, head to the shops, pedal to the waterfront, and grab a delicious donut and enjoy everything that downtown Vancouver has to offer. Cyclists are welcome downtown.
So yeah, once again, it's this example of, you know, these champions that we want to encourage them to also celebrate the projects we're doing. It is also a bit of showing people who you're trying to get on bikes. Teenage girls maybe not necessarily cycling in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver a lot at the time. And we wanted to show that this was another way that teenage girls could travel to do a very teenage girl thing of going shopping with friends. So just these ideas, thinking about that. And then the last campaign for videos that I wanted to share with you was actually one created by the city of Eindhoven. So understanding that you as a city or a municipality can lead that messaging. And it can be part of how you help people understand what it is you're trying to do. And for the city of Eindhoven, it was really important that they communicated what they were doing with their Mobility 2050 plan, was trying to reach as many people and improve their options for walking and cycling in public space as possible, and public transport. And so they created this video in order to communicate that to the broader community, where although Eindhoven is in the Netherlands and experiences a lot of high cycling rates, there is still a bit of a car mentality in the city. And so the idea was to show what it is they're trying to achieve and who they're trying to benefit.
Terwijl de groei van Eindhoven gegeven is de bloei een keuze. In deze stad, waar alles beweegt, staan wij even stil. Om groots te dromen. Elkaar de ruimte te geven. En samen de toekomst vorm te geven. Hier zien we stadse reuring en dorpse rust. Vullen groen en grootstedelijkheid elkaar natuurlijk aan. Waar we in vrijheid kunnen bewegen. De buitenlucht ons goed doet. En kunnen ontspannen. Een stad waar het soms ook anders kan. Waar we ons vervoer kunnen kiezen en delen. Waar we zonder zorgen samenkomen. Waar het veilig is Ook voor de allerkleinste. Hier bouwen we een stad waar we geen grenzen voelen. Die echt toegankelijk is voor iedereen. Een stad continu in ontwikkeling, waar we gezond oud worden in een schone toekomst. In verbinding met elkaar en de wereld om ons heen. Hier zien we het gebeuren. Alles beweegt. Wij gaan vooruit.
And so it's a lovely campaign where, again, they're talking about health, they're talking about relaxation, safety, development, clean spaces, but they do it in a way that creates a compelling narrative that can make people proud of also being in Eindhoven. And so I share it I should have warned that it's in Dutch, but I did put English subtitles on, so hopefully you caught that. But it's just a way from the city's perspective, to control that narrative, but in a compelling way that will hopefully help to bring people along over the next 25 years as this development goes further. So with that, this is my second last slide. Yeah, just want to emphasize that when we're creating these successful narratives, it really helps to achieve our goals for happy, healthy communities. And that's what we need to remember when we're building these communications back in. And so with that, I will say thank you as well. I'm going to shift back over Chris is coming to me. There we go. If you have any questions about what I've presented, you can connect with me on LinkedIn here or send me an email. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen in 3, 2, 1. There we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Melissa and Chris. That was awesome. Really insightful and inspiring. It's really cool to see how, how changes have happened over time, and also more briefly, really happening. These things are happening all around the world, and all around our country as well. So it's really amazing, and we're really grateful for you to share this with us. Not everyone has the opportunity to travel and see these things firsthand and see how well they're working, and how things are able to change and ultimately connect and work well together. But change is not hard, so we really appreciate some of the tactics, some of the strategies that you shared, that folks are doing that you guys are doing to try to communicate and get people to see how this will work, and why it will work, and why it will really eventually be better for everyone, especially drivers, because if they don't have if it's just a parking lot, no one really wins. So it looks like we had a couple of questions come in the chat. I saw that, and just so everyone knows, we will share a link to the YouTube. This presentation is recorded. It'll be shared. It'll be on our YouTube channel, where we'll share it with everyone, and as well as a PDF. Thank you, Chris and Melissa, for allowing us to share that of the presentation, and we'll also put it on the event page. So with that, Carly's going to read some of the questions that we've gotten, and feel free, if you have a question or something came up you want to ask, to put it into the chat. And I encourage all of you to please follow Chris and Melissa, because they're a constant source of inspiration and insight to me and to others who follow them. So thanks again. Carly, do you want to share some questions? Thank you.
Sure. So we'll jump into the Q&A section now. The next one is a 3-part question, but I'll give you one by one. The first part is, how does the gas price in the Netherlands compare to the USA, and does that affect pedestrian and bike use?
Yeah, and I think Brian, because we don't drive a car here in the Netherlands, so we're not privy to the price of gasoline here. It looks like Brian has responded with the statement that it's 3 to 4 times higher here in the Netherlands. But insurance is lower. I mean, I think these are all contributing factors, of course, to the overall use of the car. But at the end of the day, I think one thing we always try to emphasize is the rate of car ownership here in the Netherlands is comparable to that of many other countries in Europe, including Germany and the United Kingdom. It's actually quite high, and it's not that it's either or. The car is a tool that people use, but it is the fact that they can choose the bicycle for those shorter, more practical journeys in their neighborhood, and perhaps jump in the car for longer distance trips between cities. So through that lens, I think most people have access to a car, and particularly when it comes to bike train intermodality, the statistics that we see is many of those people that are using the bike train combination each day have access to a car. They could use that car in that situation, but the intermodality between the bike and the train to get them from city to city is just more attractive. It's more enjoyable and more convenient. And at the end of the day, it probably costs around the same, but it's just a better experience and frees up, again, as we keep emphasizing, that motorway space for the people who want to drive and still need to drive.
Great. So Brian already answered the other two parts of that question. If you want to see, you can go into the chat box. I'll read some other ones for you both. This one says, how do you address pro-car part of society? Those people whose perception of bicycle is poor and personal needs are only priority over any benefits for others. Some percentage of people who quite aggressively and egotistically defend car dominance. What, in your opinion, is the impact of cycling solutions on bikelash?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris and I have held firm that, and it's not always the answer people want to hear, but for the people that are fervently against cycling being a benefit, we might not be able to convince them to get on a bike, and that's okay. And we might not be able to convince them in general. But I think what we need to emphasize on more is the people that are interested but don't know how they'll benefit or aren't getting that right information. And so, yeah, it's really coming at it from how can we create communications? How can we speak to people in a way that meets them at their level, whether they've never cycled before but are interested, or just don't understand, how putting in a bike lane isn't going to impact them negatively. Really addressing those very real questions in a way that says, I hear what you're saying and I can see why you might not understand, or not, don't say don't understand, why you might be frustrated by this. This is how we're addressing these kinds of concerns in this way that will have the least impact in terms of loss of parking is a big one. We're reallocating that parking somewhere else, or loss of road space. We've calculated how much space is needed, and this will have a net zero impact on traffic flow in this space while creating that safe space for someone else. And again, reminding them that not everybody is in a car. And in a way that isn't saying you're wrong, but just reminding people that you've heard from the community that children want to cycle to school safely, for example, or people with disabilities would prefer footpath sidewalks that are a little wider or more buffered, and that will help to create safe environments for them while having minimal impact on those that still want to drive. Yeah.
The only other thing I was going to add to that is, as you can probably tell, largely our approach and our advice in these situations is not to spend your precious time and energy engaging with those people. They are convinced in their self-righteousness, and you're not going to convince them otherwise. And really, we try to focus our time, and we advise our colleagues and friends to do the same on this movable middle. I've heard it referred to 60 to 70% of the population that is open to the idea of choice in their transportation system, of safer streets, of giving more livable and prosperous communities. And if we can weave together this narrative of a more optimistic, more positive future, then I think we can bring much more people along with us than trying to convince a few people that are never going to come around to this idea. And we don't need 100% consensus to proceed on this. Ultimately, any kind of change is going to result in some backlash, and we have to accept that and find ways to work around it.
Yeah, and the other thing would just be don't engage with the negative comments unless someone's talking directly to you. Avoid answering comments online. It's probably not going to go anywhere positive.
I'm not sure we can hear you.
No.
But I
Can you
do
hear me
see.
now?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. 1 second. Lost my questions. The next question is for Chris. It says, could you speak to the behavioral aspect of being a driver in the Netherlands, and might Dutch driving behavior suggest that changes are needed here in North America to leverage the benefits of cycling infrastructure investments?
Yeah, and we get this question quite often, and I'm always, well, I'm careful when I answer it because I think it's too easy to say that the Dutch are better drivers than their international peers. We've actually seen through research that that's not the case, that they break the rules and speed and behave badly and aggressively just as much as other drivers. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to other contributing factors, not the least of which is the infrastructure and the networks are designed to really reduce the amount of conflict, those areas and points of conflict between the modes of transportation, and to create really forgiving environments where that rule breaking and aggressive behavior doesn't result in serious injury or death. But having said that, of course, I think there is a built-in advantage to a system where virtually everybody rides a bike at least once a week. So when you're in a car, you are more aware of your surroundings, you're more empathetic to other road users. They're not the proverbial other. They are you in a certain extent, at least for part of your week. There are very complicated liability laws as well, which basically place the blame on the more powerful road user in the case of a collision. So if a driver hits a cyclist, they're automatically deemed at fault unless they can prove otherwise, which is another really powerful motivating factor for drivers to be very diligent inside their car. And then the last aspect, and I think Melissa can perhaps talk a bit more directly about this, is the driver licensing process, because she's in the process right now of getting her Dutch driver's license and is having a heck of a time because it's so difficult and really rigorous in terms of the training and the testing. It's at a level that we've never experienced as when we were in North America.
Yeah. For various reasons, I have to go through the whole process of getting my driver's license again. And I have this lovely, I'm studying right now, traffic manual. And really I've been doing practice tests. The failure rate for the theory exam is extremely high. I haven't passed passed a theory test yet. So you have to get 44 out of 50 right in 30 minutes. But it's very, in terms of the theory studying, there's a lot of focus on priority. There's a lot of focus on safety and care for vulnerable users, where you can do certain speeds, where you can't. And there are so many, I think we're not going to change the US highway code with this call. And I don't suggest you do, but I just want to show you, there are this many pages of traffic signs that we have to learn and all the different exceptions. And that really means that you have to be aware while you're driving around. You have to know what's happening, what signs mean what. And that makes, driving here a little more defensive, I think, than what, I mean, we learned defensive driving in Canada as well, but it's just another level here in terms of ensuring that all road users behave in a way that ensures their own safety, but the safety of other road users without creating undue hindrance. And that's actually a general rule for safety in the manual as well. Yeah.
But a good question.
Yes.
Our next question is, how would you address the larger roads we have in South Florida? And should these roads be avoided as part of the network, or should they be retrofitted to provide for AAA network?
Good question.
And that, I think, is difficult to answer with a broad, generalized summary. I mean, it really, again, it comes down to the network-based approach. And if there's enough origins and destinations along those larger roads that people want to access, shops, community centers, schools, public transport facilities, then you do need a direct connection. And that does mean a AAA cycling facility along it. But The other part of this is, and cities in North America have done this quite well, is there is a lot of low-hanging fruit and opportunity to use quieter side streets, back streets, just through the act of traffic calming, and reducing the speed and the volume of the cars on parallel roads to the busy arterial roads, but it has to be at the network level, thought of and planned out at the network level, and it can't be either or. And so I think one of the exercises we will do in the Think Bike workshop in January is to look at Palm Beach from the network level and see where people are, the origins and destinations, where the short car journeys are taking place, and where we can maximize the impact of the cycling infrastructure to make sure we're catering where those trips are already taking place.
Yeah, no, and I would just add on to that, it is very much understanding, like looking at the whole network from above and understanding trip generators and trip destinations. It's not always about a cycle lane or infrastructure on every street, as Chris said. Some streets are just through roads, and we don't need to worry about that as much. But if we are talking, for example, about trip chaining and multi-stop trips where they would connect along these routes, then we do need to think about how we can do so safely and comfortably. Um, yeah, I don't think there's anything more to add to that. Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. I saw a comment, but I had a couple of questions. I guess to tie to your answer to that question, in the Netherlands, like Houghton or other towns, you guys have created plans that are networks, right? With priority routes, with certain routes that are prioritized for cars and others that are prioritized for people walking and bicycling. And that, like you said, the origin destinations, they all connect. But like in some of your cities, you might have a ring road and then you have other like network of car roads, but you have other ways for people to get around. Here in the US, I mean, there's networks of alleyways in some cities or other things like that. Or what we're trying to do, we're trying to identify opportunities to hopefully fund through our funding programs, but where there might be an easement or there might be an area of land there's nothing really going on there, but it's in between two neighborhoods, and that could be a shared use path that ultimately connects a park with the school, and no one really knew it was there. So trying to find those network connections is really important, and making a network good for, not every network will be great for everyone, but making a network for everyone that is great, right? So they overlap. I think that's one of the best takeaways with your guys' plans that you have in your cities and things, having those, what is that network and how does that work for really well for cars, really well for bikes and so forth. I wanted to ask, two things. One, I'm curious, you guys have had some really big changes recently, like in Rotterdam or in Utrecht and other places where you had a huge highway right through your downtown, and that thing got blown up, and now it's a place full of people and people biking. How the heck did you change from all those cars? Like, where did they go, and how were you able to overcome that change? Because that must have been, moving mountains to do that. And now people are happy and it's working, but how do you go from that to from this to that?
Yeah. Well, in terms of where the cars go, I mean, I think this comes back to, the point we were just making and what you were saying, Valerie, in terms of that hierarchy of network. And a lot of times these inner city highways are basically just, fast main roads. And there are other more convenient ways like the ring roads that people can take. And so the idea is really dispersing traffic that doesn't need to be there to places where they can go fast. What I've heard colleagues refer to it as is basically this: we will only travel so far before we want to speed up. And inevitably, we just want to be able to move efficiently, whether we're walking, cycling, driving. And so the idea behind the planning in cities like Rotterdam, Eindhoven, that were much more car focused and they're shifting, is to provide that logical space for cars that need to move fast and efficiently, and move them out of spaces where you need people to be stopping constantly. And so that's, in the Rotterdam case, that's been what they've done, is push that traffic to those ring roads, to those through roads where pedestrian cycling traffic doesn't need to be there, and then retrofit the spaces in the places where you want to have people come and spend time. So it's not this idea of just cutting it off, like, that's it, no more car traffic and find a way. There's always a greater plan in terms of where that traffic should be pushed, so as to not, yeah, grind the whole system to a
But
halt.
I think
Yeah.
the important thing to emphasize is a lot of these transformations are part of broader strategies to establish the heart of the city as kind of a living room, as a social and commercial space. And this is one thing that the Netherlands, I think, does remarkably well is Rotterdam has a inner city living room strategy, or city lounge, they call it, sorry, that really has reimagined the city center as a place to spend time and money with the understanding that, well, we can now get anything delivered to our door within seconds or minutes. We need to compete with that with experiences and really great, high quality public spaces. We're social creatures, we're active creatures. And when we're provided those types of spaces, we will flock to them and bring our wallets with us. So this has, I think, been part of the strategy and why you've seen these former motorways that were built by post-war planners in their infinite wisdom. Now the city's being recaptured as a place to stay. And of course, there are other places in the city for movement, but the heart of the city is really seen as the living room where residents come to in their free time to relax and to socialize and to yeah, be a fully fledged citizen of the city, and we think that's obviously quite special, but it's not easy. And as you've indicated, anytime you start talking about taking space from cars, the sky is going to fall. Predictions start, and you have to have these very difficult and heated conversations about yeah, existential questions about what your city's for and who it works for and where you want it to be decades from now.
Yeah. I think, yeah, the only thing I would add to that, building on that is it is often a values question. And so the immediate response will almost always be, what are you doing? Don't do that. You're gonna like businesses will think you're cutting off their possible economic return. People driving will think that you're removing their ability to have the freedom to arrive by car. But if you actually sit down and have that conversation about what do you value in this
Hmm.
space in our
Hmm.
city center? What do you want from this? And then say, okay, well, these are the ways that we can do that. It might require shifting how you move through this space, or where you stop your car, but it does mean that we're going to bring that quality of life that you want, that the values of good social spaces in. We just need to work together to find that reality.
Yeah. I think we have a couple more questions, and I know we have just a few more minutes. I wanted my last question that I wanted to ask was, where are you seeing this in the United States? You mentioned Austin, but we have this trend here where we kind of in the last 50 years have been everyone kind of like left the city centers and they went to the like suburbs, but then now it's kind of a trend back to retrofit because people don't want to spend their life driving and it's not like sustainable. It just keeps getting farther and further and worse and worse. So what places in the United States is this like happening well that you guys have been seeing or working with that are retrofitting their types of environments to that are like ours, very car centric and everything, and that it's actually like advancing?
I mean, the interesting thing to us is it's happening in so-called second and third tier cities. It's a lot of smaller college towns, like Davis, like Eugene, like Madison, like Santa Cruz, which obviously have a very high student population, smaller geographic area, and less media scrutiny, perhaps, but also able to move quicker and more nimbly on these types of things. So, yeah, those are the places where we're doing a lot of work these days. And the big cities, it's not to say that they're a lost cause, but I think they tend to move a bit slower and maybe have a bit more uh, stakeholder engagement to do to form some type of consensus. But we're seeing a rise of interest in this topic, and elected officials, they're specifically being elected to make change happen in terms of mobility and public space and quality of life. And it's makes us optimistic that this will start happening in the big cities as well.
Yeah, I think yeah, just from like the second and third tier cities, I think the part of the reason is that while you see this influx of people coming back to larger cities, there is still a finite capacity for a lot of these places, or there's a finite well, there isn't. There's not a finite amount of money that people will have to spend to move to these places. And so for some people, it's just not realistic. And so that's why do see this movement. And we see it in Europe as well, in these small and mid-sized cities, trying to create this attractive environment for people that can't just pick up and move to the city, need to still possibly drive to get to work. But when they come home, they want to be able to have access to these amenities, the quality of public space. And I think that's a lot of reason why you're seeing this push is that these second and third tier cities want to make sure that they stay relevant and attractive to people so that they stay, and also attract new people to come and live that maybe, once again, can't live in Manhattan, but can live in one of the satellite cities instead.
Yeah, I've actually, I don't travel that much, but the places I have gone, big cities like LA, New York City, and I hadn't been in a few years, I was really blown away to see that they've transformed these roads that were just parking lots in their these big cities now with cycle tracks and all these kinds of things. And I'm sure that is hard in Washington, D.C. too. So I'm seeing like in big cities happening as well. And so it seems to be happening all over the world, my family's from South America, from Chile, and I went there, and my husband's from Lima, and also kind of like you come back after a few years and you're like, wow, there's cycle tracks and pedestrians and all this stuff. So it seems to be kind of a global movement, big and small. I did see a couple more questions come in. Carly, I'm just going to read them. I'll start first with Michael Rose, that said he's a cyclist, road, gravel, MTB, and cyclist commuter. He's on the Cycle Maniacs team and looks forward to working with you guys in Northern Palm Beach County. And he'd like to see more examples of cycling and trains, like bike, Brightline, and Tri-Rail, and buses, and how we need more safety and sure cycling can be successful. You guys talked a little bit about that, but kind of like that bike train connection.
I mean, this is there are likely more examples from the US that I'm not necessarily aware of, but I know like obviously the Netherlands, we have every train station has bike parking. Most have OV fiets. If they don't have a bunch, they have at least 5 or 6, which is the bike share. You talked about that, right? Yeah. Just reminding myself. But outside of the Netherlands, you see this coming up more and more. There's a lot of work happening in France, in terms of those connections. So the Paris Gare du Nord, they have a new cycling facility a cycle parking facility that opened up because not only do they have the intercity trains going through, but they also have the more regional commuter rails going through. So to provide that connection. In Vancouver, we think it could be better, but they are putting in more and more bike lockers at the SkyTrain stations there because they understand as a cycling city themselves, people need to access that. Same with Montreal. They're putting those kinds of racks more and more at their metro stations. So not necessarily the long distance rail, but the intercity travel.
But this is, I mean, one area where we think Southeast Florida and all 3 counties have a head start. There's actually really quite good routes for bike train intermodality. And through our workshop with Broward County last year, we learned that there, over 10% of all the Tri-Rail passengers arrive at the station on some form of micromobility, whether it's a bike or a step scooter. And that's with little to no infrastructure, provision. So you've already got that base despite pretty hostile environment. The sky is the limit, I think. And you also have to point to the bright bikes that are now available through the high-speed rail system. These are all very positive first steps, and I think if we start taking this topic seriously, you're not going to reach necessarily Netherlands levels of bike train intermodality with tens of thousands of bike parking spaces at the train station, but the potential there is significant, but it has to be developed at the same time as you're building out your public transportation system instead of tacked on at the very end.
Sure. Well, we have 1 minute left, so I just want to thank you guys so much. We did have one last question from Melissa, from Nathan on our team, actually. If you could speak to effective tools to engage audiences that have forgotten the joy of cycling, and have you found an effective strategy to bring folks back into the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we do. But it is really about, for us, the messaging has always been sharing the positive impacts through photography, through videos, simple things like just going, to do groceries in the city center, which we know we have the privilege to be able to do that quite comfortably. But just reminding people these are the little joys. And I think for Southeast Florida, there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of potential already that we got to experience when we were there, sharing, cycling into the downtown area of West Palm, for example, and enjoying a coffee or riding along the Everglades, like these wonderful moments that maybe we forget how nice it is to be riding in nature next to water, or riding with a friend to go and grab dinner. Just all of those touch points, if there's a way to create content that reminds people of that in a very positive way, keeping the messaging away from the tropes of this could be better, or it's fine, but don't forget, but rather just celebrating the feelings that come with it. I know we focus so much nowadays everywhere, all of us, on how we feel and using that to inform what we do, but when we're talking about bringing people back or reminding them of the joy of cycling, we have to rely on that feeling part of it, because that's what's going to remind them why they started and why they should keep going.
Sounds like the title of your next book, if you don't already have it, The Joy of Cycling. Well, thank you guys so much. We're at time, so really appreciate everyone who joined us today. Really appreciate your time to learn and continue to kind of move, be able to improve what we can, the quality of life here, and access and mobility for everybody. So really appreciate you guys sharing your insights and lessons learned. And again, we'll share this with everyone, and look forward to continuing to follow you on and everywhere you go, and the successes you're doing. So, and also seeing you in January. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.